My 4-year-old son was just diagnosed with autism, and I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'm not sure what this means for his future or how to best support him. What should I be focusing on right now, and how can I better understand what he needs? This is a common question, especially as I work with parents and I diagnose their children with autism spectrum disorder, or they come to me after their child has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and they oftentimes say that they're feeling really overwhelmed and they're not sure what to do. Let me first tell you this. Take a deep breath. Autism spectrum disorder is a death sentence. It is not something to panic about. But guess what? It is likely your child will need some support, just like every other child in the world needs support. And yes, some of those supports will need to be individualized and catered for your child, just like every other child in the entire world. So number one is just, you don't need to panic. I know it can seem overwhelming, and I know it can seem like autism spectrum disorder, I've heard so much about that. Well, guess what? Breathe easy. We are learning more every single day. And just so you know, it's not something to be wildly concerned about. Just know your child is going to need support, just like they would need support even if they weren't diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And they'll need individualized care, just like they would even if they weren't diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And in the book that's coming out on October 10th, Putting the Pieces Together, I'm going to plug it again, Putting the Pieces Together, Understanding and Supporting Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder, I try to break it down and really make it as simple as I can, that there's one major difficulty happening in the brains of children with autism spectrum disorder. I don't mean to trivialize it and say that this is the only thing that's happening, but because there's chemicals and all sorts of different things happening in the brain, and every individual is different as well. But the major difficulty in the brain of a child or an individual with autism spectrum disorder is that all the pieces of the brain are firing, they're all working. And actually in children, each region of the brain is sometimes working faster and more intensely than someone who does not have autism, but those pieces of the brain are not coordinating with each other. It's this brain connectivity issue where all the pieces are active and they're all working, but they're not communicating to form one full picture. It's like several pictures all scattered rather than making one final image. So, as a caregiver, as a parent, your job is just to help those pieces work together. That's really what a lot of it comes down to. The reason that things like visual schedules can really help children with autism spectrum disorder, and all children, but especially those with autism spectrum disorder, is because a visual schedule helps pieces of the brain work together rather than trying to remember what's next and remember all the items that are necessary to do what is next. The visual schedule just presents it right there in a simple format where all the pieces of the brain can be working together. So as a parent, just know your job is to love and support your child. Whether your child is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, whether they're diagnosed with anything else, or whether they have no diagnosis at all, they're going to need some support. And some of that support is going to be individualized, and some of that support may be intense. But if you will love your child and work to understand their perspective and understand what makes them amazing, and focus on the positives and help those pieces of their brain work together, then that is what you can do to be supporting your child who has this diagnosis of autism. So let me also say that as part of the release of the book, I have designed a page on the Bad Kids Don't Exist website that has resources for caregivers of children with autism spectrum disorder. You can go to badkidsdon'texist.com/autism, and you'll see 6 resources now, and there will actually be more added over time. You can see those things on the website. There are some screeners for autism spectrum. There's a document that breaks down the levels of autism spectrum disorder. There is a document that talks about some things to discuss during an IEP meeting for your child if they are in school. There's a checklist for teachers to make sure that their classrooms are sensory friendly. There's a document that breaks down the 5 P's that I talk about in the book, putting the pieces together, understanding and supporting children with autism spectrum disorder. Those 5 P's are patience, predictability, peace, positive presumption, and play. It breaks those down and shows some ways that you can implement those 5 P's into your daily routine. And there's a link to be able to purchase the book. So if you go to badkidsdon'texist.com/autism, you'll see all those things, and check back often because more and more things are going to be added for resources to go along with this book. But breathe easy and know that your child is amazing. It's nothing to be overwhelmed by. It's nothing to panic about. Just focus on what makes them so amazing, and then see if you can find some ways to help those pieces of the brain work together, and see if you can show them a little more patience, and if you can build a little more predictability into their routine, and if you can make sure that their environment is peaceful, and if you can always believe that they are doing their best with the positive presumption, and if you can play with them, those things are going to be so beneficial. Just know that your child is amazing, and being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder does not change that. As a matter of fact, you will see that there are some incredible things about children with autism spectrum disorder, just like there are amazing things about every single child in this world. Thank you so much for that question.